Close enough to yours? Alright, so take this, and say I want to do that on an outset. Alright. What happens is, because the outset's wider here than the GPX is, when I try to do that same grip, my hand more so ends up sitting kind of on top of the mouse instead of pinching the sides of it. It's not necessarily bad, but it does mean that mostly if I lift the mouse, I'm lifting it with my fingertips. I'm not got much traction to help kind of grab or lift the mouse. It's just kind of hanging out back here. Can it work? Yeah, absolutely. As long as your pinky is pulled far back enough that lifting the mouse is not an issue. Doesn't try to, fall out of your hand every time you go to pick it up. So if you have a mouse that's significantly wider, not down here, right, at its very widest point in the back, that's like where the GPX is 63, is like right here at the bottom and at the widest point. So rather than here, I'm talking more up here. Does that make sense? I don't care that much about the way that the hump loses height towards the back or towards the front. Like you're talking about the ZA being much steeper back here. Yeah, it is. But that changes almost nothing about how I would pincer claw this mouse by comparison. The only question is, do you still have space in the center of your palm, or is it big enough that it's forcing contact up in this area? For me, right, the ZA12 is just small enough that if I pinch the base of my hand together the way that I do to copy your grip on the GPX, when I do that on the ZA, then my knuckles and my palm up here on the inside aren't touching the top of the hump. And so it works perfectly well for pincer claw grip. Now this front right corner is kind of low, and there's this raised edge right here that kind of digs into the side of my ring finger a little bit. So it's not necessarily a mouse design that I would say is, perfect for this type of grip, but it's certainly workable. There's nothing wrong with it. If anything, the fact that it's a little bit wider toward the top than it is at the bottom out here, as well as along the sides, compared to the GPX where it's mostly straight up and down, very slight incline, helps make the ZA feel a little bit more locked in when I grip it. But it's a lot closer to having that hump start to push against the underside of my knuckles here if I relax my grip even a little bit. So it's kind of on the upper end of how tall and how back humped a mouse could be and still be usable for pincer claw. With the XE, if I take your GPX grip, I'm trying to remind myself of more or less what it is. My first two fingers are a little bit more bent than yours just because my hands are longer, but anyway. And I put that on here because it's wider towards the front. My ring finger's ending up more kind of on top of the side of the mouse on this lip here than it is sitting down on the side of the mouse. My pinky's doing all right. That's kind of fine. And I've got contact back here, all right? Plenty of space up here. But it's kind of more similar to the outset almost. I mean, I get some traction, some grip over the back of the mouse just because for my skin type, this coating is really grippy. But in general, this isn't a hump which is necessarily giving you a lot of height here to grab onto, because it's angled kind of in towards the top, and it's not particularly high back here where my knuckles or my are trying to grab onto it. It's still kind of this height, whereas the the GPX is kind of up here rather than down here. And so I think overall the XE tries to kind of squirt itself out of my hand a little bit less, but mostly that's not the shape, that's the coating. So when I've been talking about this stuff, I'm not trying to tell you what the best shape for pincer claw is. I mean, you already have a GPX. It's a pretty reasonable shape for that grip. You seem quite happy with it. Ultimately, there's not a whole lot of reason to go searching for something else. Are there some mice out there that theoretically are maybe just slightly better suited to that grip style? Sure, I think arguably the ZA is potentially one of them, but again, a lot of it is based around the fact that this coating is really grippy, and so it lets me squeeze this hump really aggressively without it trying to kind of shoot forward out of my hands from the pressure that I'm putting on it, because it still narrows a lot towards the back, and so the more I try to pinch it between the sides of my palm, the more theoretically the shape is going to try and go out of my hand that way. And so the more I need to be pulling the mouse into my grip with my fingers to counteract that. So it would get more tiring to do. But it's kind of a trade-off that you have to decide where you want to end up on that scale, because for the most part, with at least my experience with pincer claw, tends to be that the more tense your hand is and the more aggressively you're pulling the mouse into your palm, the more stable that grip is, the more locked in you are, the better, at least for me, the better I tend to play. But it's quite tiring to do that. So it's like, yeah, if I want 30 minutes of my life where I have some of the best aim that I get, then I'll grip it like that. But ultimately, that's not really what I want to do all the time. And then if I want to relax, then I'm just going to relax my hand a little bit more and have my knuckles make contact with the top of the ZA instead of pincer clawing it. So I don't know. It's not really an answer for you. I'm just what I'm trying to do is I can't mind read and tell you what the most perfect mouse on the market for your particular subgenre of pincer claw is going to be. What I'm trying to do is help you understand the different parts of a mouse shape that can make it difficult or not work well for pincer claw grip, and then you can make your own decisions about which ones you're most interested in trying going forward. The S1 and the NP01 end up feeling pretty similar because they're pretty much the same width at the back, and they're wider than the GPX. They're about as wide as the outset, overall quite wide, and they work for pincer claw, but it's a different feeling because you really get them kind of into your palm, and then you have to put a fair amount of pressure on with these 2 points here to kind of tense your hand into enough of a shape to where it gives you a pincer claw with that grip. And the other thing that they tend to do, not as much the outset because of the way it's tilted, but especially with the NP01 where it's a more consistent height across here, my experience with it is that kind of slightly tilted pincer claw you're doing is not a particularly great fit for that mouse. Where it shines, you can go find Crafty Crafts, that's with a K for the first letter, review of the NP01. It's a pink NP01. It's like a 35-minute video. But anyway, what he points at in that video is that the way that shape works for his grip is to use a very, very tilted pincer claw with both his ring and pinky fingers toward the front of the mouse. And with that particular kind of type of pincer claw, then he's able to really lock that wider hump into place and gets an extremely stable grip out of it. So in that sense, you can use that type of a grip with both the S1 and the NP01, and they work pretty well for pincer claw, but only that type of pincer claw, not the kind that you're doing. So yeah, I don't know, like, what the best way to say it is. I understand that my answers to your comments haven't necessarily clarified things for you that much. What I was trying to get across is that I don't necessarily think that the way a hump looks just viewed from kind of the side profile is that important as it relates to pincer claw. I'm more interested in the way that the mouse gains or loses height in a specific location on the hump based on the shape kind of right there. And so it's usually more interesting for me to look at the mouse from the back, and I notice that if it has a flatter top to it, then there's more space for my first two knuckles, which means it's less likely to interfere with that part of your hand that people that pincer claw normally don't want to touch the mouse. So the reason that I brought that up, and the reason that having a flatter top to the mouse is generally something that I would point at if I were describing what to look for in a pincer claw mouse, is not necessarily because you need it, but rather because it gives you a safer kind of a choice. Like the mouse with a flatter top and not as high of a highest point on the hump is less likely to be something that prevents you from using your preferred variant of pincer claw grip comfortably. And I'm saying you in kind of the collective sense, as in anyone who asks me about pincer claw mice. Whereas you, the commenter that I'm replying to, your particular slightly tilted brand of pincer claw grip is generally one where you can generate enough of a gap here that you don't have to use something like the XE that's flatter across the top. You know, you can make that grip work with a ZA12 if you want to. It can't work. It's just a question of, you know, how, whether you're willing to grip it in the certain way that it kind of needs to be gripped in order for you to sustain an effective pincer claw grip on it. And that's the same thing that myself and a lot of other people kind of bring up when we talk about the G303 Shroud Edition, is that it's very much a mouse that feels designed for one particular kind of grip, which happens to be a pincer claw grip. And it's a difficult mouse to grip in most other ways. So it's pretty restrictive. It's pretty demanding on the user that you accommodate your grip style to that particular shape. Hopefully that distinction is clear. Whereas the reason the G Pro X is so popular is, for the most part, there's nothing about the mouse that really forces you to use a particular style of grip. Like, you can straight up palm the thing, you can, you know, regular relaxed claw, you can pincer claw, you can really tilted pincer claw, you can aggressive claw, you can carpal stabilized claw, you can knuckle claw, you can extended fingertip it, you can regular fingertip it, you know, kind of take your pick. They're all pretty workable. The reason that stuff like the GPX is, again, simultaneously popular and yet not necessarily praised that heavily for its shape is basically because of that. It's inoffensive, but it also doesn't have this set of features that's slightly more appealing to somebody who's really enthusiastic about a certain type of grip that can situationally make the mouse feel, you know, better for that particular person. Anyway, you've probably stopped watching by now, so I'll quit rambling. But hopefully having some visual aids and my attempt to pick my words and be a little bit more concise and direct is proven to be more useful than what I was typing on Reddit on my phone while sitting on the toilet at work earlier today.